Coming off the bloated Assassin's Creed Valhalla, many gamers including myself wanted an experience similar to that of Assassin's Creed 2. We yearned for more of a grounded story with simplistic gameplay that focused on a handful of targets and didn't overcomplicate things with a bunch of RPG elements. That brings us to Assassin's Creed Mirage, a game that was marketed as the franchise going back to its roots, but did Ubisoft actually rework and align this game closer to its earlier titles? Let's find out. The story for Assassin's Creed Mirage takes place in Baghdad and has you playing as an assassin named Basim, taking you through his journey into becoming a member of the Hidden Ones. If you're like myself and haven't played an Assassin's Creed game in years, then you probably came into this being very skeptical. Without spoilers, the plot is watered down to what you would expect, as you start off with Basim before he becomes an assassin and then play through some events after he becomes one. Most of what occurs is relatively easy to predict and doesn't require much effort or thought. Even without reading the notes, you can figure out why these characters make the choices that they do. The main issue with the story is that outside of the main cutscenes, all the dialogue and interactions in between aren't memorable at all. At first, I found myself caring about each and every character and the problems that they brought to Basim. But eventually, I only cared about what information that character would provide to us when revealing the location of one of the villains, called the Order of the Ancients. You don't know who these people are, as their faces are covered by golden masks, but the whole premise of the story is to find each one of these members and kill them, with a lot happening in between. The simplicity of the story makes it easy to follow along and helps players understand the situation more clearly, connecting each member to the overall world and seeing the impact that the person has on the community. Eventually, the story comes to a head, but not in a way that I was expecting. Not only does the story deviate, but it does a poor job at explaining exactly what's going on and what it means. Once you see what Basim is going through, you may find yourself asking, okay, how does this affect us, and why should I care? I found myself asking those same questions. In my opinion, the story could have been wrapped up a lot better. It felt as if the story was on a straight and narrow path until a certain point, and then it veers off into another direction. Because of the change, it may make you not care about what happens to anybody else except Basim. It's worth noting that if you played Assassin's Creed Valhalla, or have at least heard of it, you probably know that Basim's in the game, since it takes place 20 years later after Mirage. So knowing that he's in Valhalla, which takes place in the future, eliminates any fear of consequence regarding his life. And since almost every other character in the game is forgettable, the story loses its luster pretty quick. So in the end, you can tell that this game was meant to be an expansion. The story is very self-contained, which isn't a bad thing, but because of this, it's not fleshed out quite enough to make the player truly care. So when it comes to the story, I don't blame you if you start losing interest fast. The gameplay is where I was expecting the biggest difference. All throughout the marketing leading up to release, all I heard was, it's more grounded, and the game is going back to its roots, but when I actually got my hands on the game, this was only partially true. So starting off, the game still has about what you would expect in regards to classic Assassin's Creed gameplay. You can parkour off buildings, jump down and assassinate enemies, and pickpocket anybody in the street that's carrying valuables. On the surface, it has just about everything you could want, so why are there issues? Let me explain. Beginning with the movement, as I mentioned before, you can crawl up and down buildings, jumping from structure to structure almost effortlessly. But what's weird is that it still feels a bit off. Many times as you try and climb a ledge or jump off a post, there's a bit of delay that can throw off the timing. This makes it so you swerve out of place and miss the designated area, which can hurt if you're performing a leap of faith and you miss the bale of hay. Outside of the delay, Basim's movement as a whole is actually pretty good. I played this game in performance mode, which was a smooth 60 FPS, and it made a difference. Regardless if I was crouching and moving or killing enemies, each move had some fluidity to it and felt relatively easy to execute. The graphics were pretty good, even in performance mode, so I felt no need to play in quality mode and reduce the frames to 30 FPS. This was deeply appreciated, as many times I found myself on the wrong side of encounters and needed a fast getaway. Having the movement be a mix of old and new will help newcomers and returning vets get used to the traversal in each region. When it comes to combat, this still needs some work. So when you're fighting enemies, you're able to lock onto them so you can focus on that specific enemy at the time. Normal video game lock on stuff, no big deal. But there's many times where you're surrounded by enemies and can't focus on one at a time. In other fast-paced action games, this wouldn't be an issue, but in Assassin's Creed, this can be a big problem. There's a stamina meter right underneath your health bar that depletes as you perform attacks and dodge enemy attacks. This is no big deal if you're fighting one enemy, but when dealing with crowds you need to be a little bit more careful. You can't just bash away at all the enemies because your stamina will run out and you'll end up taking some hits. Thankfully, this game has a parry system that's introduced early on in the story. In order to parry, you have to press L1 before an enemy completes their attack, giving you the option to perform your own attack and break their guard. This is very useful when in crowds because parrying an attack completely refills the stamina meter. So you could imagine how a fight within a crowd goes. You get surrounded and then stand there and wait for the enemies to attack so you could parry and kill them quickly, all without draining you of your stamina. This makes the combat a lot more bland than it could have been, and without a stamina system, you could have taken out the enemies even faster, spicing up the combat. You may be wondering, how exactly do you know which attacks you can parry and which ones you can't? Well, that's made simple as enemies glow yellow each time they perform an attack that can be parried, and glow red when performing attacks that must be dodged. This is perfectly fine for telling the player what can and cannot be dodged, but there's a glaring issue that I just have to speak about. Just like the other Assassin's Creed games, you have the ability to use eagle vision, allowing you to see enemies, valuable items, and other important collectibles. When this happens, these objects will glow a certain color: red for enemies, orange for story items, and yellow for treasures. The issue arises when using the vision and then immediately entering combat. Too many times I was in vision mode, which would highlight the enemy red, and then it would take 3 to 6 seconds after exiting focus for the enemies to not have the red glow. This was problematic during the combat because of the parry system I just mentioned. How are you supposed to know which attack can be parried if the enemy is still red from when you used focus only seconds ago? Short answer, you can't. The only option in these situations is to pray and dodge until the screen returns back to normal so you can properly assess the enemy. This is another aspect of the gameplay that hurts the combat and makes you have to think twice before using eagle vision, so this doesn't happen as much. If you've played an Assassin's Creed game before, then you'll be happy to know that iconic tools like throwing knives, traps, and noisemakers make a return. Once you unlock the tools, the combat becomes very easy. You unlock the tools by progressing the game and using your skill points to purchase extra tool capacity. Once purchased, you have the option of what tool you want to add to your weapon wheel, which houses all of them once unlocked. They all have some sort of benefit depending on the situation, but without a doubt, the throwing knives are by far the best tool to use. You have the ability to upgrade each tool after unlocking them by gathering materials and unlocking tiers within each tool. These tiers would give the tools different benefits, with you being able to choose only one in each tier. Once you upgraded the damage, increased carrying capacity, and unlocked the ability to pick up the knives after they were thrown, you could one-shot almost every guard and never run out of ammo. This made each combat encounter a breeze, since you didn't have to worry about ammo conservation as every knife was reusable. Obviously, which tool you like using the most depends on your specific playstyle. If you like to kill your enemies, you may prefer the knives like myself, but if you like taking an all-stealth route, then using the traps and smoke bombs may be for you. Regardless, if you use all the tools in every combat encounter, then your enemies will stand no chance. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, you have the ability to do this teleportation attack, which allows you to target 3 enemies and then quickly teleport kills one after another. When compared to how grounded the rest of the combat is, this was definitely a surprise. To have the ability to move at such a high speed doesn't make much sense, and proves that this game isn't quite as close to the older titles as we had originally hoped. Now don't get me wrong, performing the movement is fun and serves a purpose, but in my opinion the mechanic didn't need to be included in the game at all. It's like the devs tried to converge both old and new in regards to combat, and some of it stuck, while other aspects did not at all. Mission structure is another area where the game could be vastly improved. At first, everything seems new and fresh, but quickly you realize that for each order member, you have to do the same thing over and over. The main missions are broken up by cases, and to find those cases you have to open up the investigation menu, where all the cases you were assigned are based on the specific order member they corresponded to. Going through these cases themselves gets tedious very fast, as most of the missions require you to speak to a couple people and then grab some items. As I mentioned earlier, the dialogue within these segments is forgettable, and when you do listen, they don't provide much substance. But the biggest problem lies with finding the objects after a person assigns you the task. Many times I found myself wandering in circles or was flat out lost because I couldn't find where to go next. Even when using the eagle vision, you could see the highlighted item, but the game gave you no idea on where to go to actually acquire it. Most of the time I would just walk around until I stumbled upon another person who would give me a hint, or I found an open window that I could crawl into and then snag the hidden item. If the game placed the markers more accurately mid-quest, then it could eliminate a lot of the wasted time wandering from place to place. Thankfully this doesn't happen a lot, but when it does happen it can be extremely frustrating. Since we're on the topic of exploration, you could use your pet eagle to fly above the city and uncover enemies, objects, and hidden treasures. This was very helpful as the bird could tag anything you wanted and could help pinpoint characters' locations when the game doesn't just give it to you. Using the bird is a mechanic that I used almost every time I started a new objective, as it made finding what I wanted so much easier. When not completing the main story, you have a handful of things to do in every territory. The main attraction are the contracts, which are essentially side quests. These are divided up by faction and would have you performing different activities like escorts and killing targets that will reward you with valuable materials. These would appear in your investigation page in their own panel, separate from the other main cases. If you want to fight enemies without moving forward in the main story and be rewarded for it, be sure to complete these. When inside the streets, you could pickpocket anybody that's holding rare items by pressing triangle and performing a quick mini game that's highly addicting. Believe it or not, lining up a color inside a triangle is actually pretty fun. If you're someone who likes collecting items, there's various golden treasures across the entire map like enigmas, artifacts, and more. Some of these are for reading, while others can be traded and used for dyes that would alter the color of your outfit. This sticks out compared to the other treasures and are harder to acquire as the minigame increases in difficulty since they're such sought after items. Included is a notoriety system that would increase as you committed crimes like stealing and killing people, resulting in an increased guard patrol. In order to decrease your notoriety, you had to rip down posters scattered across the city or bribe these speakers with power tokens to get everyone off your back. Regarding these tokens, these were a neat gimmick that were used as a currency to bribe leaders and officials so you could get whatever you wanted. To acquire these tokens, all you had to do was loot chests and continuously pickpocket people. On your first playthrough, you're going to always want to be looting and pickpocketing as there's many times in the story where you have to bribe someone in order to progress. Just some friendly advice. The map is broken up into different regions, each filled with treasures to find and shops to visit. How do you get there though? You can unlock the fast travel by synchronizing the landmarks, running to each place, or using your camel or horse to arrive at the destination. To my surprise, you could choose if you wanted a camel or horse, with the horses having different colors and names, giving them their own identity. The horses and camels are great for traveling across the hot and humid deserts, or just trotting through the city streets. The world itself feels large, but not too big, as it's always easy to find the region you're looking for, even if you're completely across the map. Overall, Assassin's Creed Mirage is a step in the right direction and brings the franchise closer to its roots than it has in many years. If this game was refined a bit more, this could have been truly something special, but instead, it's just a flawed but still enjoyable experience. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game a 7.5. This game does some things well and others poorly, but if you haven't played an Assassin's Creed game in a long time, then go ahead and give this game a shot, either for $50 or on sale during the holiday season. What did you think of Assassin's Creed Mirage? If you stopped playing Assassin's Creed games, is this enough to pull you back in? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
We will have to fight our way out. Our revolution begins now! With me!